Following the tradition from last year, we have surveyed the class to ask which faculty member they would like to hear from at their end of course ceremony. And they chose Marc Szepan. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Marc Szepan.
Farzana, thank you. Dean Tufano, Associate Deans Reynolds and Harvey, Site Business School colleagues, student family members and friends, and most importantly, the best MBA class ever. It is a great honor to be able to represent my SBS colleagues here today and to celebrate with you. I have to admit, though, that initially when I was informed that I'm supposed to join an event with the dean, student reps, and the whole MBA class, I was a little bit apprehensive and nervous. Fortunately, thank you to David Pierce. David made clear the nature of the event, and again, thank you very much. It's incredible. It's an incredible honor to be here with you and your friends and family members. Above all, congratulations to having completed a very busy and challenging year. We've done a lot of pub crawls. You've cleaned everybody else's clock at the MBATs. I think we got to tell the new incoming class that they should give some sort of opportunity to other schools as well, otherwise they might not show up again. And of course, most importantly, I think, if I reflect on my own MBA experience, you've made friends for life. Now, academically, you've taken dozens of courses. You're supposed to go to hundreds of class discussions and group exercises. And you've read thousands of fascinating journal articles and case studies. And yes, I know some of you are looking at each other a bit perplexed. What? We're supposed to read case studies? So, if you're really nice to Christian Klee, you still might be able to pick up a couple of course binders. The content actually is pretty interesting. Apropos of Christian and our other professional colleagues here on behalf of the faculty, I think as we all appreciate, your Oxford experience is as much a function of what happens in the classroom and the fantastic work that gets done by our colleagues outside the classroom. So thank you very much for enabling us to do that, and please, why don't you give the SBS team a hand. Now, Peter already has given credit to your families. Let me add a little bit to this. And I think in many ways, doing the MBA, as much fun as it is for you, is actually a much bigger challenge for those of your families or significant others. Having to move here, having to find childcare, having to deal with you studying around the clock and never going drinking. So thank you very much to the family members as well for your patience and for your support and for enabling our students to be as successful as they are. And a hand to your family members as well, please. Talking about family members, I'm looking for Andile. I think, Andile, your kids were at SBS so often. I'm sure I'm doing things above my pay grade, but we probably should give your kids a degree as well. Now, as we all know, as our dean consistently emphasizes, at SBS, our mission is to tackle world-scale problems. So let me switch gears a little bit and then talk about some of those. And when we look around, Dean has just mentioned a few of those, but there's a host of truly world-scale problems that we in our modern society have to face. We have the environmental threat to our planet, the return of international conflict, the deterioration, if not disappearance, of political and social consensus in many society. Resolving all of this will require great leaders and great leadership. And that's the good news. You actually are lucky to be able to go back into the workforce in this sort of age in which great leaders and great leaders will matter more greatly than ever before. So congratulations to that. We're happy for you that you have that opportunity to make a difference. Now, when we think about guiding principles for good leadership, let me share a few ideas. And as you know, before I had the privilege of joining, some of you know, before I had the privilege of joining the faculty, I spent some time as a senior executive in the aviation industry. Given the occasion, let me refrain from mentioning the name of the company. I certainly would not want to come across as doing a plug-in for any sort of commercial enterprise in these hallowed halls. Also, I did make the mistake of mentioning the company, the airline I used to work for before at the beginning of a class a few years ago, and then one hand goes up and said, "You lost my luggage." But in the spirit of European unity, more important than ever, let me share with you 3 stories, one from a British, one from a French, and one from a German aviation company that hopefully illustrates a couple of examples of what I think constitutes good leadership and good leaders. Given that we are in the United Kingdom, let me start with an homage to the home team. Now, in the morning of the 10th of June, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 was taking off from Birmingham Airport, bound for Malaga, Spain. The aircraft assigned to the flight was a British-made Bach 111 short-range aircraft. The crew consisted of 2 pilots and 4 flight attendants, including Captain Tim Lancaster, First Officer Alistair Atchison, and cabin crew members Nigel Ogden and Susan Gibbons. There were 81 passengers on board. British Airways Flight 5390 took off at 8:20 local time from Birmingham, had an uneventful takeoff, and was climbing to flight level 173. That is roughly 5,300 meters above ground. And as you can imagine, it is fairly cold up there. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and the cockpit rapidly filled with condensation mist. The left cockpit window, for those of you interested in this, that is the window in front of the captain, had blown out, had separated from the fuselage, and as it would turn out, had actually blown the captain, sucked the captain out of the airplane. So the captain's feet and lower body was still inside the cockpit, and the rest was stuck outside, again at an altitude of 5,390 meters. For those of you who have climbed Mount Everest, you know, the air gets a little bit thin up there, it gets cold, and of course they were going at a speed of several hundred miles. And so the captain, Captain Lancaster, was stuck halfway outside the aircraft, going a few hundred miles in sub-zero temperatures. Now, fortunately, competent professionals, as British Airways crew are, they managed to regain control of the aircraft and initiated an emergency descent towards Southampton Airport. And Captain Lancaster's life that day was saved by heroic teamwork and incredible determination on the part of a number of members of his crew. Let me read from the official accident report. The number 3 steward rushed onto the flight deck and grasped the commander around his waist to hold on to him. Meanwhile, the purser re-entered the flight deck, having hooked his arms to the seatbelt of the 4th crew member jump seat, was able to assist the steward in the restraint of the commander. The 2 men tried to pull the commander back within the aircraft, but the effect of the slipstream frustrated their efforts. The number 2 steward entered the flight deck, and he was able to relieve the number 3 steward, whose arms were losing their strength as they suffered from frostbite and bruising from the windshield screen. The number 2 steward grasped the commander's right leg. He held him by the ankles until the aircraft had landed. What the report fails to mention is that the number 2 steward, a gentleman named Nigel Ogden, suffered frostbite to his face, frostbite in his eyes, and held on to his captain while suffering from a dislocated shoulder. Now, they made it safely to Southampton Airport, and of course, in the best tradition of British stiff upper lip, Captain Lancaster returned to flight duty just a couple of months after that horrible accident. First Officer Atchison and cabin crew members Gibbons and Ogden were awarded Queen's Commendations medals for valuable service in the air. Now, I think there are some leadership lessons in this. First of all, when your team members really are in trouble, when they really need your support, no matter how much energy, no matter how much effort it takes on your part, you always hang on. You never let him or her down. Secondly, all of us at some points in our lives, at home or at work, find ourselves in challenging circumstances. Hopefully not as challenging as dangling outside an airplane cockpit at 5,300 meters of altitude. But no matter how trying circumstances we might find ourselves in, personally, professionally, or otherwise, no matter how bad the situation might be, I think there's a lesson in this. We never ever quit, and we never ever give up. Now, as on a side note, once that landed in Southampton and Captain Lancaster had received proper medical care, he actually woke up from a coma, and the first thing he did was asking for food. So there's another lesson learned in there, especially for MBAs. Never forgo the opportunity for free food. Now, in the spirit of inspirational stories from airplane accidents, let me share a second story. A few years later, on the 20th of March 2001, a Lufthansa Airbus A320 took off from Frankfurt Airport, bound for Paris in France. The flight crew consisted of two pilots, a 41-year-old captain and a 27-year-old relatively young first officer, and 4 cabin crew. The captain was very experienced with 903,000 flight hours and held an aerobatics rating. The first officer was very junior, barely having accumulated 2,000 flight hours. The flight had 115 passengers on board. The takeoff run down the runway went smoothly. Right after takeoff, captain was the pilot flying. Right after takeoff, the airplane hit crosswind or turbulences and started banking to the left. The captain responded by doing opposite input in the side stick. For those who are interested in that sort of thing, Boeing airplanes have control yokes, Airbus airplanes, modern ones at least have side sticks, kind of like a Nintendo joystick type of thing. The captain started doing opposite inputs to correct the banking situation, and despite the inputs, the aircraft continued banking to the left, reached a banking angle of 22 degrees, and at the lowest level, the left wingtip was barely 1 meter off the ground. At this point in time, the first officer saved the day. He resolutely took control away from the captain. And again, for those of you interested in cockpit procedures, the way this goes, it says, I have control. You push the takeover button on the joystick and he took control. And due to the decisive action that that young man, the first officer, took, control over the airplane was regained, stable flight altitude was restored, and the crew was able to do an emergency landing at Frankfurt Airport. As it would turn out, during the accident investigation, the cause for that was a miswired computer in the airplane, meaning if you give input to wanting to make the airplane go to the right, it actually banks more to the left. Now, leaving aside the technical details of this root cause analysis, I think it is worthwhile emphasizing that it was the decisive action taken by a very junior first officer who took command away from a much more senior captain that saved the day and most likely saved the lives of 100 plus crew and people on board of that flight. And again, there are leadership lessons in that almost accident, in that incident as well, that apply, as one might argue in this day and age, not only to work, but to matters far beyond work, going into society at large. First, when disaster becomes increasingly likely, let alone obvious, no matter what your seniority might be, no matter how senior you might be in rank or age, or how junior you might be in rank or age, you do not stand by. You do not let bad things happen. Instead, you take command and you take decisive action. Second, as senior leaders, it is incumbent upon you to create an atmosphere and a culture in which junior team members will feel empowered to take decisive action to prevent disasters like that. Now, as I said, I wanted to share, in the spirit of European unity, I wanted to share stories of a British, a German, and a French organization, and this is one about the French. And this is a story about, I think, great personal courage, about heroism and nobility. Now, on 27th of June, 1976, Air France Flight 139 departed from Tel Aviv in Israel. It was bound for Paris, with a stopover in Athens in Greece. At Athens, they picked up additional passengers and continued the trip to Paris. On board were just over 240 passengers and 12 cockpit and cabin crew, led by Captain Michel Balcot, a 52-year-old Air France veteran at the time. 8 minutes after takeoff from Athens airport, Air France Flight 139 was hijacked by 4 terrorists and forced to fly to Entebbe, Uganda. Upon arrival at Entebbe, the hijackers moved the passengers and the crew out of the airplane into an airport terminal building, and after they started separating Jewish and non-Jewish passengers. The Jewish passengers included a Holocaust survivor. 3 days later, 148 non-Jewish passengers and non-Israeli passengers were allowed to leave. The terrorists also offered Captain Balcot and his crew to return to freedom as well. Captain Balcot informed his crew of the offer to be freed. The entire crew, including the captain, the pilots, and the flight attendants, decided to stay with the remaining Jewish hostages. As he related to an interview in 2016, there was no way we were going to leave. We were staying with the passengers to the end. This was a matter of conscience, professionalism, and morality. A few days later, on July 4th, for those of you from the US, on Independence Day, a daring nighttime operation by an Israeli Defense Force elite commander unit rescued the remaining hostages. During the rescue attempt, 3 of the hostages lost their lives. In addition, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Yoni Netanyahu, the man who was commanding the ground attack force, and the older brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's current prime minister, made the ultimate sacrifice in a firefight. After the hijacking, and after a 2-week long, or as one might say, rather 2-week short break, Captain Barkov returned to flying duty. The first destination for his first flight he requested was Tel Aviv. Captain Barkov has passed away in March of this year. Now, obviously, none of us hope to find ourselves in this sort of situation. Certainly not on the victim side, and hopefully in terms of professional goals, not on the other side as well. However, I think there are some profound leadership lessons to be learned from Captain Barkov and his crew, and this builds on what the Dean just said. Now, when you return to the workforce, the organizations that you lead will have to comply with applicable laws, regulations, and standards. And depending on depending on the jurisdiction in which you might be working, those might include some sort of fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Now, obviously, speaking for the school, it goes without saying that we would prefer our alumni to be law-abiding, upright citizens. Going to jail normally is not a career-enhancing move, depending on the career. Having said this, I think the examples of Captain Barkov and his crew are reminders that there's a higher responsibility and a higher moral obligation and indeed nobility that comes with the privilege of leadership. So, first of all, as leaders, you always have a duty of care for your team, especially in circumstances of great personal adversity. Second, I think this duty of care extends to those that have put their fate into your hands. In the case of Air France Flight 139, those were the passengers. In other cases, those that have entrusted themselves to you, of course your team, but those might include your customers, might be the people who use your products, and it might be the communities and societies in which you operate. Now, I sincerely hope that none of you has been afraid of air travel and that I've exacerbated those fears by telling you these stories. Let me assure you, first of all, flying is really, really safe, despite of all of this. Second, this is also not some sort of conspiracy, to reduce CO2 emissions by scaring you away from flying. But I think there's an important larger point, because one of the, I think, defining characteristics of your generation of leaders is a quest, and a very admirable one at that, for meaning and purpose in your professional lives. And of course, as the Dean mentioned in his speech, we are incredibly proud to be part of that quest on your part. And of course, none of us would want to build a career in an entirely non-ethical or morally questionable type of organization. However, please allow me to suggest that the pursuit of something meaningful or purposeful can be as much a matter of how as a matter of where or what. And of course, yes, ideally, we would like to find the perfect company or firm, or for those of us that are interested in non-corporate careers, the perfect government, the perfect NGO, the perfect international organization, or the like. And obviously, we would not want to discourage the search for a perfect place and a perfect job. At the same time, I'd like to suggest that it is possible to have a very meaningful and indeed purposeful career in an organization that in some ways perhaps falls short of ultimate levels of perfection. Now, if you reflect on British Airways' Nigel Ogden saving his captain's life by holding on to him after he had gotten sucked out of the cockpit, and doing so despite a dislocated shoulder and severe frostbite in one of his eyes. We think of the Lufthansa junior first officer who prevented disaster and most likely a significant loss of life by initiating decisive action and taking command from his senior captain. We think of the Air France crew led by Captain Barkov, refusing to leave behind their passengers in the face of the evil of terrorism. If that is not meaningful or purposeful, I cannot think of anything else that would be. So perhaps, allow me to suggest, the pursuit of meaning and purpose can be as much a matter of how you work and how you conduct yourself as leaders as it is a function of where you work and what type of organization you lead. Now, after this wonderful experience here, some of you have defended and will continue to defend our freedom and way of life in the armed forces. Ahmed, Christian, Ollie, or in the media. Laura, I think it's called the lamestream, whatever, fake news media. Now, thank you for your service on that. Others will continue healing people. Andile. Many of you will build or will help your classmates build and finance great businesses and great innovative ideas. Others will make national governments and international organizations better than they would be without you. And at least one of you will continue working, well, literally directly for God. Rev? So if you think you have an impressive career, talk to the Rev. We trust that no matter what career you will pursue in the end, all of you will do incredibly well, and all of you will be leaders of the highest caliber. So, in conclusion, on behalf of all of us here at SBS, on behalf of our colleagues, thank you very much for the privilege of having been an admittedly small but a part of your professional journey. Good luck to you and your families for this next exciting phase in your professional and personal lives. And in the spirit of classroom etiquette, thank you for not falling asleep during the last minutes.